Okay, welcome to The Staunch, episode 4. Today, I'm very excited to have our guest, U.S. Congressman Larry Bucshon, representing Indiana's 8th District. So welcome, Larry.
It's good to be with you.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Ross, my co-host, is not here today. He's on vacation, so I'll give him a hard time when he gets back, but it's just be myself and Congressman Bucshon today. So first things first, I saw where it was National Farmers Day, so happy National Farmers Day to all the farmers that are obviously very crucial to Indiana, but specifically the 8th District. So thank you for all that you guys do. We'll start out with getting to know Congressman Bucshon a little bit more. Just kind of talk about his personal life, wife, kids, and where he went to school, and your background as far as your profession outside of politics. And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been in Congress now since 2011. But prior to being in Congress, I was a medical doctor. I was a cardiac surgeon, and my wife's an anesthesiologist. I've got 4 kids. But I grew up in a small town in central Illinois, about 20 miles south of Springfield, 1,500 people. My dad was a coal miner, worked for Peabody. My mom was a nurse. Education, my parents always promoted, so I went to University of Illinois in Champaign and then med school in Chicago at University of Illinois, and then been in practice for 15 years in cardiovascular surgery before I decided to run for office because I thought we needed more healthcare providers in the government, and I think I've been proven to be right, and I always had a passion for public policy. And so my kids are all grown now. My daughter, though, is a freshman in college. She's 18, so I have 3 older kids, and the good news is they're off my payroll. You know, they have all done well by the grace of God, and have jobs, and things are going well. So, it's an honor and privilege to be in Congress and represent the 8th District. And I do want to get a shout out to the farmers, as you mentioned. It's really important. And in the last couple of weeks, I've ridden on a couple of combines, one in cornfield and one in the bean fields, and I have a good relationship with all the farmers. They're critical to our nation's economy and, honestly, to the world. So it's good to be with you today, and I look forward to the conversation.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, so staying on the the farmer business front, real quickly here. So obviously you're probably familiar with the Mid-State Corridor coming through, like Martin County area, and I think obviously the intent is to drive more business all the way from Du Bois County to Crane Naval Base. What is your opinion about how that Mid-State Corridor can positively affect, and then how do you it's hard to have the balance that with then how that affects farmers. There's a few farmers in the area that it takes over 100 acres of theirs, but at the same time it could help keep our economy going in this area. So
yeah, I mean, it's a controversial issue locally in that area of my district, and I'm pretty much leave it up to the local officials in the state to decide what the appropriate approach is to the Mid-State Corridor. As you mentioned, the premise is it will make transportation easier and bring more commerce to the region, but some people have fear that going around some of the cities will have an impact on the local family-owned businesses that are on the main roads in those towns. So it's, from a federal perspective, we don't really have any role in that at this point. But there's positives and negatives to everything that you do. Anytime you take away good farmland, you have concerns about that. But again, that's going to be up to the local officials at the county level and the state level to decide what the most appropriate approach is and how that balances all those interests.
yeah, I agree. It's I understand the environmental side of keeping family farms in the family for generations, but I also understand trying to extend the life or bring additional business to the area long term. So yeah, so staying on that front, one of the things I think President Trump did while he was in office was renegotiate NAFTA. And come up with USMCA. And in my profession, I deal with, I'm a procurement manager for a big truck OEM. We work on bringing stuff that was originally sourced in China, the EU, India in some cases, bringing it back to North America. So, and it forces companies like mine and many others to do the same thing. So it's been a positive thing. And so how do we, I guess, what's your two-parter? What's your opinion on that? And then two, how do we get those types of businesses to come to the 8th District and Indiana as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the USMCA was a big win for America's workers as well as North American companies. I mean, there were, NAFTA had been negotiated back in the 90s, and it was outdated, and President Trump, I think, did a good job balancing the interests of the people he represented, the citizens of the United States and American businesses, but also getting what I'd consider fair trade, making sure that whatever we do between the three countries in North America, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, it's fair to the American workers and to everyone else. So I think it was a major advance. The other thing is to remember in the 90s, essentially no internet, right? So the e-commerce stuff and that part of the economy as it relates to the digital economy wasn't part of the original deal, and so we had to figure out a way to address that, which I think for the most part they did in a good way. So I think overall it's a positive thing. President Trump kept his word, and I think I supported that. As far as getting jobs to the 8th District, yeah, trade is important. But I tell you, right now we've got to get in control of inflation. We got to get control of fuel prices, because if we can't get control of those things in the United States, it makes it difficult for new businesses to start, and it makes it difficult for current businesses to stay in business because, the fuel prices, for example, affect everything. I mean, diesel. Look at diesel prices right now, and you expect truckers to be on the road. Independent operators, some of them, or companies, and you see the fuel prices, and that has been the result, I think, of poor policy out of Washington D.C. Partially. I mean, in fairness, COVID had a big effect, but then when you have an administration there that's stymieing energy production in the United States, as it relates to fossil fuel, and then in the last year passed trillions more in spending, which I voted against, didn't think was necessary in many respects, and didn't get a balanced approach on an infrastructure bill that actually did what we wanted it to do, but instead a big part of it handing out money to their political friends. Well, then you get this result. So I think big picture, getting Indiana kind of sells itself. We've got a budget surplus, we've got a fair tax code, regulatory code. I think trying to get businesses into the 8th District from international locations, it depends on the overall U.S. economy. We got to get a handle on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think with that too is talk about inflationary costs. I think energy crisis has been a huge thing as well. In the EU, they're 10, 20 times what the cost was before all this started. And it's, talking to some of them over there, it's going to be even worse. So we're not to that point yet. I think it seems like you were just talking to that we're suppressing the gas prices right now. And I think before midterms or right after midterms, we'll see another spike in fuel prices, unfortunately. But
yeah, I mean, I think, the European situation, especially in Germany, shows us what happens when you get an energy policy that tries to address is trying to address an issue, which I think we would all agree, getting our control of our emissions and in a practical way decrease the amount of emission, carbon dioxide emission that we have as we generate energy and as we utilize fuels. Getting so far out ahead of that ideologically, where you think that you can shut down energy, all energy production from the fossil fuel space, and then rely on only renewables, like and then close down your nuclear plants like Germany was doing, just doesn't work. And they have the highest fuel prices in the world over there. And the other thing is, I want to say on that subject is, when you are dependent on another country for your energy, they're dependent on the Russians for natural gas. do we want to repeat history here in the United States? No. The United States can be energy independent. We don't necessarily need anybody. We just need to allow our producers to produce. And, we need to have a practical timeline to, and let the market designate where we go on what we utilize to generate energy and electricity in this country going forward. If we do that, we'll slowly continue to decrease emissions. We'll ultimately have carbon capture. And we don't stymie our economy and have fuel prices that are going to be unaffordable for most people I represent.
Right. Yeah. So that's another question I had is, so what's the solution, given the state that we're in today? Do we turn on more coal production and just refine that process? Do we use more natural gas? What does that look like? Because, as you probably know, there's really no such thing as zero emissions, and the materials that we're using to mine and come up with these to make the batteries and the EVs, the whole EV sector is also carbon emissions. So
yeah, I think that's the other thing that I think the message doesn't get across from what I'll call the political left on this issue, the ideological people, is that for example, and you mentioned the electric vehicles. I'm not against them at all, but we don't mine any lithium in the United States. It all comes from China and South America,
right?
And the environmental damage from that mining is not even considered by the people in the United States as part of the mix. And then, what do you do with the batteries when they're at the end of life? Where do you put them? What do you do with them? There's an environmental impact. Solar panels, same thing. What do you do at the end of their life? Well, we're throwing them in landfills, and they got all kinds of metals and other things in them. So, yeah, you bring up a good point. You have to consider the entire life cycle of every way that you generate energy. So my feeling is that we have to have an all-of-the-above approach. We have to continue to look at technology advances in renewables, in nuclear, where we have these smaller nuclear reactors that we can recycle fuel over and over and not have to dispense with it. We can burn natural gas and coal more cleanly, which we've been doing, but also get carbon capture that's feasible. And yeah, we need to pursue all of those things. Technology and innovation is going to get us where we need to go. Government mandates are not. And all they're going to do is cause my constituents to pay higher prices, and in many cases, something they just can't afford it.
Right. Yeah. And, Warren Buffett actually just made a huge bet on carbon capture. So I think that'll be a huge thing. It's already a thing now, but I think in the future, it'll be a massive industry to be in. So I hope that our federal government can be productive to stimulating that type of the economy.
I think we will. Even the ideologues on the environmental left are starting to realize that, hey, if we want to get to what their goals are, right, that may not ever be attainable, I'll be honest with you. But say hypothetically they want to get to their goals. They realize that fossil fuel is going to be part of that. Right. And so, because it's just the way it is, right? It can't be done with just renewables the way they think it can. It just can't be done. I know the data. So now they've realized that if we're going to use fossil fuel and they want to get to their goals, they're going to have carbon capture, right? And so you're starting to see political support on the environmental left for developing carbon capture. And so I think you'll see that at the federal level too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to transition into more of the medical side.
Sure.
Just because Congressman Bucshon has a medical background. So Obamacare, Trump tried to repeal, and
yep.
In my opinion, whether it's his fault or not, it's on his administration. Didn't really have a good replacement plan, or at least it wasn't executed. And there's a lot of political factors leading up to why or why not that wasn't successful. And I know Senator Braun passed, I think it was 2018, had a plan, but being in a disadvantage with a Democratic House and Senate, not really be able to get that in place either. So what's your What's the best way to repeal? I know that's a very broad question, but how do we repeal Obamacare and effectively to where it, is a positive thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Obamacare per se is going to be repealed because it's so baked into the way our system runs today. It's been in place for now 10 years, roughly, and so what we have to do is, by the way, when we were in the House majority during the Trump administration, we passed legislation, to repeal Obamacare and to replace it with some other what I'll call more conservative ideas to address healthcare costs and the affordability of health insurance. But of course, the famous thumbs down from John McCain, at the end killed that in the U.S. Senate, so we didn't get it across the finish line. I mean, that's what happened. We could have done it with just Republican votes, which we did in the House, but we couldn't get John McCain and 2 other senators on our side of the aisle to support it, which was unfortunate. Which is frustrating to me because, when Democrats, they stick together, when they have their thing, man, they all stick together and they vote for it. We lost 3 senators. We only needed 2 of them. And we could have repealed Obamacare and replaced it. So I don't think the whole law will be repealed. Just not going to happen. However, the issue is cost in healthcare. Healthcare costs way too much money, and the reason is because it's not a true free market. Healthcare is a price-fixed marketplace. It's not the consumer doesn't have a lot of effect on driving down cost in most of healthcare. Now, I'll use LASIK eye surgery as an example of what happens when consumers actually have some input. Right, that wasn't paid for. That's not paid for by insurance. And so, years ago, 15 years ago when it started, heck, it cost you $4,000 or $5,000 to get LASIK eye surgery. Now you can get it for about a tenth of that price. Equipment's better, doctors are better, and why is that? Why is the cost down? Because the consumers can shop around, and they drive the cost. Regular health care, say you need heart surgery, you can't do that because it's price fixed. You don't know what it costs. The hospitals won't tell you what the costs are. There's a third-party payer, the insurer that's in the middle. So my feeling is what going forward in healthcare, we need to be concerned about the overall cost, and the way to drive that down is get the consumers more engaged in the process. The pricing needs to be more transparent. Trump administration tried to do some of that, and I think when the American people see where all the money's going in healthcare, that people will start to push back and say this is just not the way we should do things. Here's the thing, though, and I was in healthcare, as you know, is the system itself does not want transparency. I mean, there's a lot of big players. There's publicly held companies, both at the hospital level, the insurance level, even the medical practice level, the pharmaceuticals, the devices, everything. And I would say the system overall really doesn't want transparency because a lot of money is being made in healthcare. And I know this because I've tried to do some things in D.C. to get some transparency, and politically that they go after me. But hey, they know where I am on this. I'm for the people I represent, and we need to get the cost down. I think that's the way to do it. I don't, more government usually leads to higher costs, believe it or not. And more restrictions, more regulations just are going to make this worse. We just need to be more free market based, get some transparency out there. And people that don't want to comply with that, we're going to have to put political pressure on them by getting the American people on our side to do it.
Yeah, so you're saying we shouldn't be more like Canada then? No,
my goodness. Here's the thing about the Canadian health system that people, if you're healthy, it's great. You can go to the doctor for free, quote unquote. It's not free, of course, because you're a taxpayer and you're paying a part of that. Mm-hmm. But if you really get sick in Canada, good luck, because the people that really get sick that have the money come to the United States to get health care because they limit the budget up there. They ration. I mean, and I know this for a fact. We do not want that type of a government-run system in the United States. Now, we want a system that is cheaper, right? We want a system people can afford, that everybody can have insurance. And the way to do that is not bring in more government. It's actually to bring in less government, in my view, and get a more price-transparent free market where the consumer actually can put pressure on the system to drive the cost down.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and so on that other front, so with COVID, I know obviously vaccines were very polarizing, especially during the pandemic, and vaccines were pushed. Even here in the 8th District, a lot of people were threatened at the Crane Naval Base to lose their jobs. So I think a lot of, especially Republicans, think that's wrong. But should Americans be concerned about the mRNA vaccines and what they put into their body? Because through the news articles that have recent, and I mean really for the past 6 months, it seems like there's a lot of side effects that are spilling over, and to me becoming more obvious as it's probably coming from the vaccines.
Yeah. First of all, let me just say there's two pieces to that answer. One is going to be on the government side, and I'm adamantly against government mandates for any medical procedure. This is a free country. The government should not tell you that you have to get a vaccine or you lose your job, for example. Right? So that's the first thing. As a medical doctor, I think people should get vaccinated for COVID, and but I think it needs to again be a personal choice. I mean, if you look at the mRNA vaccine, that technology has been around for a couple of decades. There's no risk per se from the mRNA piece of it. It doesn't change your DNA. In fact, the mRNA that stimulates the immune response actually is destroyed in the process from the vaccine. It just stimulates you to develop an immune response. So I don't. There's not a risk, particularly because it's an mRNA. That technology's been around. Now, everything you put in your body has risk, and there are people that have had substantial reactions to vaccinations of not only of COVID but all kinds. And so you need to talk to your doctor before you get vaccinated. I'd recommend everybody talk to your doctor, go over your medical history, and make sure you're not in a group of people that maybe you shouldn't get a vaccine, whether it's this one or others. I think that the risks are extremely low. We have seen in teenagers and in some kids, they've developed a inflammation around their heart, which is real. The numbers though of the millions and millions of people are low, but they're not zero. And so this is something people need to factor in. Again, you need to talk to your doctor, see what your risks are. So honestly, overall, from a population perspective, people, I don't think, should be concerned about getting the COVID vaccine. And I've been vaccinated. I've had one booster. But again, I don't believe in government mandates. I don't think the federal government should, or state government for that matter, mandate any medical procedure for anyone. It's a free country. If you make that decision between you and your doctor, and go from there, depending on your medical conditions. But I think overall, if you look at the data, what it's showing is, the complications from the vaccine are not zero, but statistically in the medical world, like I deal in, they're extremely, extremely low. But because we have 24-hour news and social media, we just find out about more of those than we did with other vaccines or other medicines. But
that's fair.
But again, talk to your doctor. Have that discussion. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, make that decision between you and your doctor. Let me say one last thing on this. We are not testing people for natural immunity to COVID like we should be. The doctors like myself on the Republican side have been pushing the federal government to help develop testing for people who we know have had COVID and what their level of immunity is. Because if you have had COVID, clearly, you develop a natural level of immunity. And we need to be able to get a test that says, look, you don't need the vaccine because you've had COVID, you have antibodies to COVID, and you're immune. So rather than talking about vaccinated people. We should be talking about people who are immune to COVID. And that can either be through the vaccine or through natural immunity through having had COVID itself.
Yeah. Okay. Good points. So that was more the hot topic of 2021 and early 2022. Now, the hot topic now with as far as medical care goes is the transgender surgeries. And I'm not really talking about the plus 18 people. There's another conversation to be had about that, but more so kids, right? And I know recently the Daily Wire had an article and a conversation on Vanderbilt and their clinic offering it to kids, and I think they temporarily got it stopped. But I guess there's a lot of money to be made in those surgeries, right? So, how real is... I guess I should just start with this. What's your opinion on the transgender surgeries?
Well,
for kids?
Well, first of all, I'm adamantly against it. I mean, of course. I mean, if you're 18 or older and you're an adult, again, it's a free country. And you can make these medical decisions yourself. But, from a medical doctor perspective, it's outrageous that we would be considering allowing children or teenagers to have a surgery that can completely change their lives permanently. This is not something, hey, I changed my mind when I got to be 19, I thought it was a bad idea. Once I had more information and I understood and I'm an adult and I can make adult decisions. So these are permanent things. So I think it's wrong. I'm adamantly against it. Young people going through puberty and stuff have all kinds of emotions and thoughts and changes. We've known this for decades, right? And to make, to allow, without parental consent, by the way, in many cases, permanent anatomic changes and physiologic changes to young children, I think it's medical malpractice. I really do. Should not be allowed.
Yeah, it seems like the Vanderbilt's just one situation that a bunch of people are sitting in a boardroom and they're saying, "Oh, how can we get more money?" And transgender. I don't want to say transgenderism, but that ideology is popular right now on the left. So they feel, in my opinion, they feel like they can get away with pushing that across the board. And by the way, it generates millions of dollars for our hospital.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I look at this obviously from a medical perspective, and from a medical perspective, again, permanent life-changing surgical procedures for minors. When people don't really, I think, have a fully developed way to assess risk and all of those things for themselves and need the assistance of adults is just wrong. I think medically, again, if you're 18 and you want to make a medical decision, it's a free country, and, you can make that decision as a legal adult, well, I might disagree with you, but that's your decision. It's a free country. But it's shameful, honestly, in any medical field, whether it's a hospital or a physician, to talk about, hey, we can make a bunch of money doing this. I mean, I didn't go into medicine so that I could try to find entrepreneurial ways to perform different surgeries on people to make money. I wanted, healthcare providers, especially a university hospital, should be looking out for the best interest of the patient and what's in the best medical interest of this individual and patient, and do the right thing. Talking about trying to make a bunch of money off something like this, I think, is shameful.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the last topics I have is Biden's the infamous anti-MAGA Republican speech he made. It might have been August, early September. I I mean, that's no surprise to anybody that pays attention, right? That's something that they've thrown out there, so it doesn't really faze me per se, but it's getting scarier and scarier in the sense of what their agenda is and what they think they can get away with. So, I mean, what can we do as American people? You know, I've said on other episodes that this is a grassroots organization, you know, campaigning is grassroots. How do we get involved and like basically put a stop to this as free Americans?
Well, first of all, I mean, they're using this MAGA Republican thing because they've poll tested it and they focus group tested that language, and they think it is to their advantage to say that amongst independent voters, right? I think they're wrong, personally. I mean, I think that, you know, the speech the president gave, I don't know if I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I'm 60 years old, a more divisive, negative speech with that kind of background, with the active military members in the background. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. I mean, that divisive like that. You know, with a red background and military people in the background, very divisive. So, honestly, I think how people can fight back against this, get out and vote. Yeah. I think you have to show up at the polls and you have to vote these people out of office. You know, they also don't understand us here in the Midwest and in the 8th District particularly. I mean, they're you know, that kind of speech is from a East Coast elitist perspective, right? I was just saying this yesterday when I'm out on the farm, you know, and I'm riding the combines and I'm talking to people of manufacturing and everything. It's like the leftist coastal elitists right now just don't understand all these great Americans that live out here. Right. You know, they don't understand that. They don't understand it at all. In fact, they would, you know, you know, what did President Obama call it? You know, carry our Bible and what, you know, the negative thing he said about people like us. I mean, people like good people in the Midwest. Again, my dad was a coal miner, mom's a nurse. So that speech came from someone that really just doesn't understand the America that he lives in. I mean, he just doesn't understand the people. And so I think, honestly, I think the best thing to do is just get out and vote and vote them out of office. Because, you know, there's no real reason, honestly, I mean, you can push back and say, what do you mean MAGA Republic? Well, I mean, you know, what is it? First of all, what is a MAGA Republican? Make America great again. Yeah. I mean, who could be against trying to make America great, right? It's just a total lack of understanding. What does he mean? I mean, why would that be? Why is that a negative thing? And part of that is they're still fixated on Donald Trump. Right. They just cannot get their brain around why the American people would have elected Donald Trump president. And so, honestly, in some ways, that's good for conservatives, because if our opponents don't even understand why they're losing and why what they're saying isn't being bought into by the American people, then that helps us. I mean, that helps us get our message out that good old American values, faith, family, and you know, hard work, entrepreneurialism, freedom, individualism, all the things that America has stood for since our founding, essentially, why those things are good. You know, the more they try to denigrate us, I think the more powerful Americans that believe in these traditional values become, particularly at the polls.
Yeah, and so there's two things in the Republican Party I pay attention to the most, but as far as going to the polls, it seems, you know, we just had a primary in Indiana here earlier in 2022, and the attendance at the polls was pretty low, and it's a primary, and, you know, there wasn't a huge amount of races, and most of the Republicans that in the bigger offices ran unopposed, right? So, but there's almost like a bigger problem of apathy, right? Of people in the millennial generation, my generation and younger, they don't really care, or they feel like their vote is just one vote and it doesn't matter. So that's one, and I'll get to the other after this answer. But how do we get that generation, my generation, to the polls more?
Well, I mean, I think this election you're going to see your generation, the younger generation. I have kids who are 29, 27, 24, and 18. And I think people who are in their 20s and 30s right now who are seeing the downside of, what is happening in their country economically, right? People who are trying to get their lives off the ground, and they see the inflation and the high fuel prices and all these things, are seeing the direct effect that national level politics can have on their lives every day in their hometown. And so, I think this election you're going to see more of a turnout. Historically, like when I was in my 20s and 30s, my generation of people voted at a much lower level than they do now, at my age 60. I think over time you start to see, hey, this stuff really does affect me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I don't think necessarily this generation is much different than ones in the past. But let me say this. I mean, how would you like to be in one of these provinces in Ukraine that was annexed by Vladimir Putin? And when they had an election to say, hey, do you want to be in Russia or you want to be in Ukraine, that military people came to their door with the ballot.
Right.
And said, here's the ballot. You want to be with Vladimir Putin or you want to be with Ukraine?
Right.
I mean, what are you going to do, right?
Right.
That's hence the reason they had, over 90% of people voted and said, oh, yeah, we want to be part of Russia. Well, yeah, because they'd get drug away by the military people, never to be seen again. So, the message I try to get across to people is your vote matters. Every vote matters because we're in a country where you have the freedom to vote for whoever you want, no matter who that is, right? You can even vote for people that 99% of the society doesn't agree with, right?
Right.
And nothing's going to happen to you. Nobody's going to knock on your door and say, hey, you just voted for someone from this party and, we don't like that. So that's the message I try to get across. And then we had an election a number of years ago down in Posey County area. The state representative won by 8 votes. And as it turns out, had more family members of their opponent turned out to vote, they probably would have lost lost the election.
Yeah.
So when I talk to young people, particularly high school kids, and I've done that recently, I'm like, your vote does matter, and because races can be close, and people need to get out there. But I think the main thing is right now, more and more awareness young people have, particularly about how these elections actually do impact you. I mean, you can't just go through life oblivious to national level or state or local level political elections because it has a direct effect on your life. And it's a tough message to get out there.
Yeah,
it really is. I do think, honestly, and some people have proposed this, that Election Day should be maybe a federal holiday. Because I can't tell you the number of people I talked to said, oh, yeah, I meant to vote, but I got tied up at work and I just didn't get there, I don't think that's actually a bad idea. Let's put some more importance on this and say, hey, this is important enough that on national election days, it's a paid federal holiday for people at work. Employers might be against that, but the reality is it's that important. It's that important that people have the freedom. They don't have to worry about going to work that day. They can get up and go vote.
Yeah, I agree. And then on the other side, there's a portion that call themselves Democrats, but they would probably agree to about 90% of what we said here today.
Yes.
But they're the old school Democrats where they cared about America. They had the same end result goal that we wanted, but just had a different way to get there.
Yep.
Which was easy to work with, right? Especially in your neighborhoods and your communities. But now they're, whether it's social media or CNN or whatever they're watching that's telling them that that is drifting them far to the left, or they just oblivious to what their party represents today. And I guess, being a vet in Congress, how do you try to go out and get that vote and get them to show up and vote red on Election Day?
Yeah, I think my message is action is a lot more important than words, right? you can have political rhetoric out there, but look at the results, right? I mean, look at the administration, through CNN and their other media partners, basically, trying to say, look over here, what you're feeling every day and what you're experiencing every day in your life isn't really happening,
Yeah.
Inflation's not that bad. Fuel prices are coming down. They're not that bad, even though they're $1 and something more a gallon than they were when the president came into office, and going up again. So look at, I think the way you get that message across to people on the grassroots level is look at what the results are, and not what the political rhetoric is. I think a lot of Democrats, particularly in southern Indiana, over the last 10 years, have really gravitated more, I would say, more towards independent voters that are open to voting for Republicans in elections. They may still be a registered Democrat, but a lot of them, they're voting for Republicans. We know this because we've seen polling, and in the last 10 years, things have changed. My dad, for example, was a union coal miner, but my dad was a conservative guy. I mean, he was a John F. Kennedy Democrat, right? And believed in fiscal control, didn't believe in big government handouts, believed in hard work. He had the same values that I would say mostly Republicans have today. And so, he wouldn't. My mom, though, was still very liberal and loved Hillary Clinton and all that, right? Oh, yes.
That's fun.
Yeah, in fact, when I first became a member of Congress, she did a reception when she was at the State Department for new members, and I talked to her, and I said, my mom really liked you, Secretary Clinton. Can I get a signed photograph? And about a week later, I got a signed photograph from my mother in the office, and I gave it to my mother. And she was so excited. She got a signed picture of Hillary Clinton. I wasn't able to convert her. I haven't been able to convert her. But my dad would go into, I guarantee you, when he passed away now, but when he was alive, he'd go in there and vote for Republicans. He just didn't bother to tell my mom that he did it. And I think you see a lot of that. But I think action is more important than words, right? I mean, again, the administration right now is trying to say, don't believe what's happening to you. Believe what we're saying.
Right.
And people are smarter than that. I think a lot of these liberal elites particularly just assume the American people, aren't smart enough to see with their own eyes and with their own pocketbook what's happening to them, right? I would disagree. I think the American people are pretty smart, and they can figure that out. So I think that's the thing, whatever party you're in, if your party has changed and left you, look at what the actions are, not what the rhetoric is, and decide which way you're going to vote. Right.
And when you've got the Biden administration out here saying, if you ain't black, you're not a Democrat. If you're this, you're that. Their identity politics is a game they love to play,
yes.
And to me, it's always a signal that we have better ideas on the right when they bring out the same three issues, which is racism, abortion, and gay marriage, right? So as soon as they bring those out on the red carpet, that we're getting too close to people and we're getting through to them, and it stirs everything up again.
Yeah, I firmly believe this is a right-of-center country.
Yeah.
Most of this country still believes in faith, family, community. And I think you're right. I mean, when we start to get a higher percentage of the African-American vote, which President Trump did, by the way, African-American men approaching 30% approval rating and 30% of the vote amongst, for Democrats, that's part of their base. I mean, they can't win elections if that keeps changing. And you're going to see that in this election with the Hispanic vote. I mean, the polling showing that the Hispanic population are leaving Democrats in droves. And the reason they are because Hispanic population are hard workers. They believe in faith and family. They believe in America. Many of them who, like my family, immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s from Hungary. They believe in the promise of America. And the Democrats today, are trying to try to tell everybody how bad America is, and you need to vote for us because America is on the wrong track. And like you said, bring up issues that most Americans, a lot of Americans, particularly on race, most Americans today, believe that everybody should have an equal chance, equal opportunity. It doesn't matter where you're from, what your race is, what your religion is. It matters what your values are and what you're like as a person. And the identity politics stuff on the Democrat side is catching up to them, I think, because most of the American people are just like, come on. I mean, we're just all Americans here trying to have a good life in a free country. Quit trying to tell us that we have to divide ourselves into these groups,
right?
And pit one group against the other when we're all Americans, all, like I said, just wanting to live a good life and be free and have the freedom to be successful and do the things we want to do. So I think it's catching up to them. I think they're going to realize that even more after November. Yeah,
I agree. We've got to quit being the sacrifices to, prolong their agenda and get them to power as they view us. So
yep,
I agree. Okay, we'll close with some more relaxed questions.
Sure.
What are you reading right now? What's your book, or what's your favorite book you've read? Either one.
Well, right now I'm listening to the audio book of George Washington's biography by Chernow. He's the same author that wrote the book Alexander Hamilton that the stage musical was based on. So right now I'm listening to that audio book about George Washington. I'm about 3/4 the way through. George Washington is about halfway through his first term presidency. I read a lot of things about the history, of the United States, particularly the Revolutionary era people and the Civil War era people. I grew up close to Springfield, Illinois, so I'm a big Lincoln fan, President Lincoln. But right now, that's what I'm listening to, and it's fascinating. I mean, when you go back to George Washington and that era, and when people think, oh my gosh, things are so bad today. Hey, you should go back and read a little bit about the fight over the Constitution when they put the Constitution together, and realize that all the founding fathers didn't agree with each other, right?
Right.
And the battle, but here's the thing, they agreed with one thing. They agreed with the promise of the future America that they were putting together, right? And so they, again, had maybe a different pathway to get there. But the one thing they didn't waver on is they agreed with the premise of what the future America would look like based on what they did. And again, we need to get back to that today. Okay, have disagreements and stuff. Quit dividing each other into groups, and realize that we need to get back to this really developing idea of self-governance. Right. We're young, our country's young compared to the rest of the world, and all realize that we need to, fight for American values. So that's why I read that stuff, because it kind of puts things into perspective about today's world. And I say that at some speeches when I give political speeches. I mean, imagine if you woke up, you woke up in December of 1776 and you were George Washington.
Yeah.
Right? Your troops are freezing to death. You don't have any food. Looks like you're imminently going to be defeated by the British. And guess what? The future Americans didn't get defeated, right? They stood up. They banded together. Or imagine if you woke up, and it's March of 1861, when President Lincoln was just getting ready to give his first inaugural address. At that time, you didn't go into office until later, till March. Okay. And you realize that the day you're giving the speech, states were leaving the Union, right? Literally.
Yeah.
And you're the president, you wake up that day, or you're a citizen. So it puts things in perspective for me to read these things. And right now I'm into George Washington.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you're like, well, we could use that type of temperament today. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would say top movie, but top 3 or 5 movies. It's hard to pick one.
Right now, I mean, I just watched Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, it's good, right?
It was really good. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, that was the most recent one, but, the movie Lincoln by Steven Spielberg, I've seen maybe 3-4 times. and it's just inspiring. I think I thought it was very well done. Also,
Yeah, I agree.
And then I believe it or not like musicals. So I watch some old school movies. Sometimes some of the musicals from the 50s and maybe even the 60s. And that's the kind of thing I watch. I mean, I watch contemporary stuff, but if best movies, are pretty standard that everybody watches. But I'd say, for me, because of my role in the Congress, Lincoln and that movie by Spielberg is, it's still something that for me is a good movie to watch.
And what about music? What if you?
Yeah, I listen to all kinds of genres. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I'm a late 70s, early 80s rock and roller. With my favorite band in high school was Kiss. Okay, I had every album they ever made, including their solo albums. Believe it or not, they did make solo albums. Nobody's heard of them because they weren't very good, but I had them. And Journey and groups like that from the 80s. But also, my mother, again, was really into stage musicals and that type of thing, and she was really into opera music. Now, I don't really like opera music very much, but I do listen still to some musical soundtracks, and I like artists like Andre Bocelli and people like that. Those are kind of my base. And then contemporary country music I listen to a lot. My dad now was an old school, Tammy Wynette, George Jones, that type of country music. And I still play that every once in a while because it reminds me of my dad when I play it, A little bit of Merle Haggard every once in a while and Johnny Cash. But I listen to contemporary country music that you hear on the radio today. So I love music overall. The only type of genre I have not been able to get into is jazz, and I've tried real hard. I bought a Miles Davis CD a number of years ago. But I love music overall. But I would say, 80s rock and roll, contemporary country, and every once in a while I'll do a little bit of retro, old school country music.
Yeah, I have to do that too. I like contemporary country. Sometimes I have to reverse it back to like Waylon Jennings or something.
Love it.
Go back to the storytelling is where it's more authentic, right? So, I hear you. Okay, so what's next for Congressman Bucshon? You have the election coming up, and where do you see yourself in the next 5-6 years, and after you're done with your political career, what are you going to fall back on?
I mean, I think my goal is has always been since I went to Congress is get the cost of health care down for the American people, right? Make it simpler for people to navigate the system. I mean, I've been disappointed, honestly, in the last 11 and a half years, honestly, with both parties about the lack of progress on cost. And it's frustrating because, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the system itself doesn't really want much transparency, and there's a lot of money involved, and it's a really tough nut to crack. So my goals are going to be going forward, at least for this next term. You never know what's going to happen in the future. I don't predict things out past the next term, is to get healthcare costs down. The other one is I think you're going to see Republicans address energy. We really have got to clarify a U.S. energy policy that's pragmatic, practical, and doable, that keeps costs down and keeps energy reliable. I mean, do we really want to have rolling blackouts or rolling brownouts? Because we've shut down prematurely all of our natural gas-fired power plants, and we don't have, we get a cold winter or a hot summer and we don't have enough backup energy. Do we really want to do that? So I would say those two areas. My big focus is going to be on getting cost of healthcare down, getting more transparency in the system, make it simpler for people to navigate, and creating an energy future where America can continue to thrive with low-cost, reliable energy. Those are going to be my goals. I don't really think about what I'm going to do in the future, I do want a third act. I mean, I've been a heart surgeon. I've been in Congress. I firmly believe that you should serve in the government, and then you should, you should move on and have another act in your career. And so, when that'll be, I don't know, but I don't really think about it too much. I'm focused on these other issues right now.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us today. Sure. Thank everyone for giving this a listen. Episode 4 of The Staunch, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.